Welcome, Sean. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here, Linda. Thanks for having me.
Let's dive straight in because we don't have loads of time. So much of the travel industry right now is really pinning its hopes on quite the kind of rebound into next year. I know you're taking a wider view, so just share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And, I'd like to share with you just sort of the way we've approached it from a Sabre perspective. What I shared with my teams early on is, I think leaders do three things in crises. There's leaders that don't react. They don't really do anything. They're sort of locked into position. There's others that really react, Linda, but then they sit there and they hunker down. And then there's others that react and they think about how do you accelerate through change? And that really is starting to get into the crux of your question. And, what we were very focused on is how do you create the financial runway to manage through the epidemic? And in doing that, we were able to essentially react and accelerate. And part of it is what we've done with our technology to focus on our transformation. But my mindset has really turned into sort of 2022, because what that has allowed us to do is I had a team focused on recovery in 2021. But my headspace is in 2022 and beyond, because I do think there's going to be a profound impact due to the pandemic on the airline makeup and what technology is going to be required, hospitality, as well as technology required there. What does the distribution landscape look like, and what ends up happening with agencies through this? So I'm very focused on really 2022 and beyond, because there's a lot that's happening right now, and I don't think we've seen the full impact of it yet.
Okay, great. So are we indeed in for another reinvention of the GDS, given the title of this session?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot, as you would imagine. And I sort of break it into four components for you. It has been underway. I mean, if you look at what has been taking place over the last several years, there's been a lot that's taking place. So I don't think we're in a world of sort of another reinvention. I think it's a continuation. The one thing that, I often talk to people about is the need for content aggregation and normalization. It's really important that that is done, because when you look at it at the end of the day, and I don't care if you're a corporate traveler or if you're a leisure traveler, there's this strong desire to shop and compare that's out there. And that is what the GDS does. It allows a lot of shopping and comparing. What's interesting, and I will bring up something that took up a big part of my life over the last year and a half, and that was the proposed acquisition and the desired acquisition of Farelogix. And the one thing that I learned through that whole process, Linda, is there are many organizations that really want to change, but I don't think they fundamentally understand what's required to change. Because when you think about NDC and NDC capabilities, and you think about how an offer is created and then how it's distributed, you also have to think about the other side, and that's the travel agencies and the booking tools that are there. So it's interesting. We are in this form of transformation that's there. Here's what I do know, and it's what we have been focused on, at Sabre, is that new technologies and capabilities are happening. They truly are happening right now. And what will be interesting, and I think this also ties back into what I was mentioning relative to why I'm so focused on 2022 and beyond, is I think you will truly see that some will embrace the technology and capabilities. The change will occur. And often what I've seen, Linda, is once the change is occurring, others will follow. So again, I think you got to put it in the larger context of what's actually taking place and how we're taking a view of, moving through essentially recovery, but also thinking beyond the pandemic that we're dealing with today.
So if it is, as you say, this kind of continuation as opposed to another reinvention, what would you say has kind of gone well in the past, and what would you say is like, okay, wish we hadn't have done that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things is, there's often this focus relative to, when I think about the transformation, it's really understanding what both sides are really looking for. And what I mean by that is on the supply side, specifically airlines, and what they're trying to think about as it relates to distribution. Their focus is on how do they continue to grow their revenue, and how do I actually have technology and capability that's enabling that to happen. And that's been part of the frustration. When you look at it from the agency side of the equation, it's, who's actually going to be investing in the technology changes that are required for our corporate booking tools that are there. And what you find, if you're not thinking bigger picture relative to, is the essential commercial model or the economics going to change with that, you find that there's somewhat of a stalemate. And, we sit right in the middle of this, and we're engaged with both sides that are out there. And again, this is what we're very focused on, is the capability of how do we bring all parties along and understand sort of what needs to happen for us to be able to to be honest with you, to be able to do more modern day retailing that we often see in other sectors.
So it's interesting that you say kind of room to grow. I mean, there isn't going to be a lot of growth in the industry, is there, for some time to come? The airlines are particularly debt laden. I think, a lot of hotel companies are too. So if the industry is smaller and corporate travel, for example, doesn't come back, then is there room for 3D GDS, do you think? Even 4, I guess, if you can't travel Sky.
Yeah, I mean, here it's a question I often get, and you would assume there's a lot of those questions that come to me, today about that. And here's the best way that I look at it from our organization, and it goes back to what we're doing, Linda, is it's truly running our own race. And I think you have to be very focused on what you're doing, the runway associated with it, the strategy, executing that strategy. And with that, I believe, and it goes back to what we've been able to do in the marketplace, is grow our GDS share over the last several years. And as you look at the environment going forward, I think you're going to continue to see that there's going to be a landscape that is changing. And if you have the best technology that is out there, that people want to be successful moving forward, that's why I think we're positioned very well for the future.
So in terms of that technology, do you think the distribution industry now will, grow in terms of new models?
Well, we've been trying. I think that's I'll go back to my statement on Farelogix. If you look at everything behind Farelogix, and what we were trying to do is actually evolve the industry. And in doing that, it's truly people that say they want to change, do they understand the fundamental changes that have to happen? And we will continue to go down that path. That's what we're doing when you look at all of the underlying technology, because oftentimes people will look at Sabre and they'll look at sort of the GDS side of the equation. But the one thing that we have truly looked at as it relates to this travel ecosystem that we are in, and it goes back to the technology that we provide, is if you look at airline IT, our focus is we help airlines create offers. And then you have to look at how that is revenue managed, revenue optimization. Airlines get to choose, do they want to push it through the direct channel or the indirect channel? And what I will tell you is they want, what is being sold through the indirect channel, they want to be sold the same way it's being sold through the direct channel, which means you then have to look at the, essentially the booking tools on the other side. So the hospitality is very similar. We talk a lot about airlines and agencies, but hospitality is just as important.
So there was a sense, it's interesting that you've mentioned Farelogix there and being kind of ready to transform and change. But actually, there's a sense that, that Sabre sort of seemed to have perhaps not dispense with NDC message, but I don't know, that it's now all about Google. So what's your ultimate vision there?
Well, I think the important thing as you look at this is, and I'll put my old hat on as an airline executive. Our focus, when I look at technology, and it really does get into what we announced with our Sabre Smart Retailing Engine, which is the replacement for Farelogix, and the capability to think about modern day retailing, is we look at it relative to our ability to help essentially airlines and hoteliers create new products that are out there. And I don't want to dive into, essentially how that evolves, but there is an evolution. And when you think about it, the capability of essentially having different ingredients and putting a product together, and how do you use really machine learning and artificial intelligence to do that, it begins to change. And as you think about it, it's going to be more driven based on what consumers are looking for versus how it's just bundled today. And that's going to be our primary focus, is the capability of doing that. It'll be up to essentially the airlines or the hoteliers and their acceptance of that and wanting to change. And I think that'll be the interesting thing over the years to come.
Would you say that falls into your sort of IT solutions side of the business, or does that fall into your distribution side of the business? Because it kind of straddles, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And I think that's the important thing that people need to clearly understand, is we often have this conversation about the GDS side, but you also have to understand that the technology on the front end is what makes this happen. And the one thing that I've been talking about in our organization, in my mind, it's about retailing, distribution, and fulfillment. And let me explain that a little bit. Is when you think about a hotelier, you think about an airline, they're trying to create those offers. And it's been done sort of in the static way historically. If you think about more modern day retailing, it becomes a lot more dynamic. We at Sabre help that happen for hoteliers as well as airlines. Then we have a responsibility for our hotel partners or our airline partners that we will help them essentially sell it through their direct channels, right? So we help develop airline.com, hotel.com, but we also have to push that through the indirect channel that goes to the agencies. So it gets to get there, our corporate booking tools, our Sabre Red workspace that's there. The other interesting thing, and this goes back to the underlying technology and hospitality as well as airlines, when you show up at the airport, you want the capability of actually checking in. And if you bought a bundled fare that has certain attributes, you have an expectation that you'll get that. Well, guess what? Our departure control systems make that happen. If you think it the same way from a hotel perspective, our property management system capabilities do that. So we essentially touch every part of your journey.
So interesting to note that your IT solutions revenue actually was greater than your distribution revenue. How big a deal is that, would you say, going forward? And how does that kind of develop going forward?
Well, the first thing I would state is sort of the resiliency of the diversification of our revenue stream, right? Because the bulk of it has historically been on the distribution side, but it also shows the importance of the airline IT piece of the equation and what takes place there. Going back to sort of what we have been talking about, it's the connection between the airline IT as well as the distribution. So when you look at our investments and what we have been doing over the past couple of years, there's nothing changes as it relates to our investment strategy, because it gets into that ultimate goal that I believe travel will recover. I've been through a number of crises before. This by far is the worst one that I have lived through, and no doubt that everybody else has lived through. But I look at it relative to what we're doing from an IT perspective as well as a distribution perspective. And as I mentioned earlier, we have actually been more accelerating into what we think the opportunity is because of the changes that we think are going to be on the other side of this pandemic.
So as you look at your investment in Google, but you also look at your airline customers who, as we said, are debt laden, how do you balance the needs of, say, a carrier like Delta, which wants to go kind of back to more traditional distribution, with, say, the needs of a European one, which wants to go kind of after NDC in a big way?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you, let me start with the Google piece real quick. There's four things, because it gets into underlying technology. And if you look at the Google relationship that we have, it's really broken into four components. The first component is a cloud deal, really good economics associated with cloud. We have 65% of our compute on the cloud today. When I took over the organization, we only had 5% of our compute on the cloud. The second piece is just really a modernization of some of the other technology that Google is helping us do. The other is really the implementation of AI, ML, data analytics, and we talked about that. And then we have this innovation framework that allows us to essentially roll out the Sabre Smart Retailing Engine. So that's the foundation. And the important thing is it gets into the flexibility of your underlying technology to understand what different strategies that are out there. And what you're hitting upon, Linda, is there are definitely different strategies that are out there that we have to think through. And in doing that, we look at it relative to the capabilities of evolving and being able to work with a Delta that is focused on a specific strategy. And then we, again, look at the engagement that we're having with some of the European carriers and what they're looking for. But it all is based on the underlying technology and the flexibility that we're building for ourselves.
Okay, very briefly, because we're really running out of time here. Where and how do you place your bets in a time of such uncertainty?
Yeah. So, part of this is you have to have a fundamental belief in what you think is going to be on the other side of this. The other thing I will share with you is as we look at the landscape, we are thinking sort of broader. There are other things that we should be getting into that we haven't gotten into before. Now, we know sort of the importance of where we are in this ecosystem, and it's the technology transformation. But I do go fundamentally back to, there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to see some failures in the industry. There's no doubt in my mind that we're going to see new entrants into the marketplace. The question is, how do you have the technology to be able to help them?
Thank you, Sean. Sean Menke, President, CEO, Sabre. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Linda.